Good morning, West Coasters, and good afternoon, East Coasters. It's Amy with Ask a Christian. Very excited about a interview that I'm doing today with Pastor David Clay. Going by Pastor David, this man, the story of how I met this man is really fun. I was looking for a Christian, a Bible-based kind of novel to read. I mostly do business books or theology books. I was just like tired of that. And I thought, I wonder if there's somebody who addresses some of the things that Christians struggle with, but from kind of a novel. I wanted to know what kind of creative writing was out there. And thankfully, Amazon has an algorithm that matches up pretty well. And I want to welcome all of you watching from other parts of the world. Hello to Teresa, who's already commenting. Let me bring on now my guest, Pastor David, and just ask him a little bit about himself and his ministry. Pastor David, how are you? Where are you talking to us from?
Hey, we're at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Amherst, Virginia. So when I look, it's quite beautiful outside. We're in a very wonderful place in the mountains.
Awesome. Hey, tell me a little bit about your ministry and how you got to be not just a pastor, but a pastor who collects stories and became an author.
Okay. Got to Virginia in '85 and as an associate pastor at a church in Richmond. And then went to Norfolk, Virginia in '92. And it was an interesting ministry. It was in Ocean View, Virginia. And it was a transitional time for the community. And there were a lot of different cultures coming into contact and conflict with one another. And racially, culturally, economically, all that was happening. So the church was struggling to really meet the needs of the community. And out of those issues that we dealt with, we really wanted to be involved in the community in a real way. We didn't want to close up shop and just be a fortress of this changing community. So we really got involved, and in doing so, there's like any story, there's going to be great conflict when that happens. And there was this great conflict, not only inside the church, but outside the church, because some of the things we did shook people up quite a bit. Yeah, and that was about an 8 to 9 year ministry. And then I pastored a wonderful, Ocean View was wonderful too, but I pastored a wonderful church near Charlottesville. And again, now we're retired in near the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Well,
so out of the Ocean View experience, and all the churches really, but especially the Ocean View experience.
I'm just guessing that some of those experiences and those early tensions have been a blessing to you and have come back around in several different times. It seems like every decade there's, new challenges, but do you feel like what all those struggles, all those weirdnesses that you had to wade through are preparing you for ministry now, even as a retired but still ministering guy?
Really the stories that came out of that experience, and even the other churches that came out of that church, they're now becoming in some way a blessing to our folks, because we really did deal with the things we deal with now. I mean, the racial issue we're dealing with now, and economic. That was going on there in that place, in the different type of people you meet. And if you get to know folks, even if they're not church folks, they're just community folks, those who are on both sides of the economic scale and background, you get to know all those folks. You get to know their stories. You're richly blessed, right?
Absolutely.
All of that, goodness gracious, it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into some of the stories and how you treat different topics, how you treat, you've got little jokes on religion, you've got little quips on small town living. I just found, by the way, I want to say the title of your book so anybody can go look it up, and I'll link it after the interview. But Buried in Baptism, David Clay is what you're going to want to look up. But I want to get into some of those stories in just a minute. First, I want to hear a little bit about your decision to write some of these stories down that are influenced by real life. Why did you decide to compile and write this stuff? What's kind of your drive in there?
Yeah, I thought that it needs to be real. Church life needs to be real. Christ needs to be real, but in addressing real problems. And as you get older, I think you begin to deal with the things in your own life. And the stories from my childhood, which we kind of gathered up through the years as I was becoming an adult. My mother would generally tell my wife or my sister about those early years, those first 6 years that were pretty difficult. And so they would say, "Did you know? Did you know this happened?" I said, "I got some recollection, but I didn't know that was it." And so, and my aunt, who's 10 years younger than my mom, would verify. She would repeat a similar story. That you knew there was some truth in it. So I began to, and I knew that I was utilizing some of that in my own ministry. I was dealing with people who, my mom was divorced twice and married 3 times, and the long marriage at the end was sometimes pretty difficult. And so, in doing all that, I realized that those stories could be helpful to people.
If you're just joining us, we are talking with pastor and author David Clay about some of his background, some of his stories that went into his book, Buried in Baptism. And Pastor David, I want to ask you about all the characters of the book, but we don't have time for that. So would you tell me a little bit about this main character, Pastor Scott Ronald Harris, where the inspiration for this guy came from, and then how he interacts with his community in the book?
Yeah, he's a real guy. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And he's a lot like me in my approach to ministry. The name comes from the 3 best friends I had growing up.
Cool.
I love these guys. One of them has passed away, Mike Harris, but Ron Cosson and Scott Cooper and Mike Harris were great friends of mine, and so I used their names. And just my own ministry and how sometimes I dealt with things rightly or wrongly, and sometimes writing the story how I wish I would have dealt with a situation better when I didn't. And I look back and feel like, gosh, I wish I'd have done better. But
so a little bit redemptive in that, where you can come back and rewrite the story.
I was a little bit better in some of them. Sometimes a little worse. You try to exaggerate a little bit, to draw broader colors and strokes, and a little bit worse maybe sometimes, and a little bit better in others.
Well, I've loved, reading through this book. I've loved particular parts about learning about this guy. One of my favorite stories about him is in chapter 9. So I was hoping that you could tell me a little bit about this situation where a guy who's in need of funds comes in and asks the pastor, "Hey, would you help me with my rent?" The pastor says, "Well, I can give you food. We don't give out money." This is like a lot of small town churches. It really resonated with me. And how does the pastor respond? Tell me a little bit about the story from chapter 9.
Yeah.
And
So,
you can feel free to read it if you want.
Well, I can recall it, and I need to. Before I talked to him, there was a lady that comes in, and she comes in on a regular basis. Yeah, and I know her, and I know her children, and I try to describe that. The fella that comes in is an amalgamation of so many fellas, so many people that came in, and the difference between how female approaches the situation, how a male approaches. And I'm familiar with Mississippi some, and um, I, I, if you remember, I actually started this book in 1995. And one of the sub themes is about smoking. And at the time, I was just tired of dealing with, this cigarette smoking. My parents had smoked all their lives, and it was inhibiting their health. And so I was almost on a crusade in '95 about this, and I just I kind of lost my temper as a pastor, of this fella who had really had money. He just wasted it smoking and with alcohol. And then I said, well, I'm going to call Philip Morris and see if Philip Morris will help him, because he's just a wonderful contributor to the coffers in Philip Morris. And certainly they must care for him because he spent so much money buying, I think, camels. He said, I'm a Marlboro man.
Marlboro. He's a Marlboro man.
I'm a Marlboro man. And I said, well, we'll call Philip Morris. At the time, I thought about putting Philip Morris's phone number in. I don't know if I did or not, but so call Philip Morris if you wanted some money and you wasted your money on cigarettes. It was an example of one out of a number of times I probably didn't quite fulfill my calling in that particular situation. It should have been a little more kind. There's a couple of those episodes in the book where, I think you call it compassion fatigue. I was just a little tired, and I remember a number of times giving money to some fellows and finding out because I would, I'd go out of my office and then I'd go down to McDonald's and they're getting drugs. They're not buying food. They're getting drugs, or they're selling the food we gave. They would sell the food, and so.
That's real stuff that happens, and we know, like, anybody who's listening who's ever worked for a church and been part of the Dorcas or the community service fund or whatever people are calling it, that's a very real thing. And as much as we would love to think that every dollar we gave to help really went to the greater good, sometimes it just goes to keep somebody alive another minute until someone else can reach them with a message. Or until
we're told to give, and we try to be wise about it, but sometimes it's not so good.
Well, I think sometimes it's good to laugh about it. And I want to read a paragraph from this. This is what you wrote, how the phone call went or would have gone. You really didn't make the phone call?
This particular story on the phone to Philip Morris?
Yes. Did you really call Philip Morris, or is this the imagination? Okay.
Well, I wish I had done on a number of occasions.
All right. So it says, at this point, I don't want to hear the rest of this off-rehearsed sermon. And if he doesn't get any money for drinks soon, the sermon will only get longer. So I interrupt him with a question. Mr. Baker, do you smoke? The question catches him by surprise. He looks out the window, squirms in his seat, crosses and uncrosses his legs, and says, well, Pastor, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, I do have the habit. What brand do you smoke, Mr. Baker? I'm a Marlboro man. I pick up the phone and ask the long-distance operator to give me Richmond, Virginia. Hi, Mr. Baker. He seems a bit confused. Yes, operator. Can you give me the Philip Morris Company in Richmond, Virginia? I look at Mr. Baker. His confused expression has changed to worry. Yes, Philip Morris? This is Dr. Scott Ronald Harris, pastor of Bayside Baptist Church in St. Joe, Mississippi. Listen, a Mr. Baker, one of your really good customers, is a Marlboro man. He has no money for rent, in part because he spent it on your cigarettes. So I'll just let you guys get the book and read the rest, how it turns out. But I just had to have a laugh because that's something that in my humanity, I would probably love to do just a bunch of times.
There's a bunch of times you wanted to shake, like, stop this, and really kind of the side that really is the water hits the wheel is to celebrate recovery. When we began to introduce celebrate recovery to this church and my next church, we began to be able to really address those issues and those even worse issues. And so we began to not just, not just give food or even money or pay a motel bill or get somebody with gas from here to there. We began to actually change some lives to
Yes.
celebrate recovery process.
Yeah, that's a great, I should put that in a link as well. I do want to say this because I think this is one of the reasons why this stands out so much to me as sort of a funny take on justice. But the deeper sentiment here is that when somebody has been trapped, I want to use this word really sparingly, right? Like, I don't think smoking's a sin. I think, I think it results in things and has been led to by things. And what I mean is, like, I just think smoking is a poor choice that hurts us.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that, like, Satan, the devil, the enemy of God and his people, uses whatever he can to hurt us, distract us, rob our lives, right? And so in that way, this is what I mean by a sin. So when we, like, this man is a member of the Church of Philip Morris. This man has been tricked, and, like, that is his congregation. But when he needs help, that congregation doesn't help him, and so it is with sin. Like, whatever we get caught up with, as soon as we need something, unless it's Jesus, like, we're left high and dry. And I think that's kind of like the sad swing of that part for me. I laughed so hard, and then I was like, ugh.
Oh, that's what I wanted to happen. Yeah, see,
Yeah.
because that's how the pastor felt when that guy left. I think, I think I slammed the door and Carl comes to the door and said, "What's wrong with him? What's wrong with the pastor?" Well,
Yeah, are you okay?
He failed this man. The pastor in that story failed this man, and it's one of those stories I think you have to tell if you're being honest about your ministry, because sometimes that happens. You don't always get it right.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to pause real quick and thank you, those of you who are just joining us. Patty Hausenfluck left a comment. Thank you.
I know Patty. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Patty. If you guys have any questions or comments throughout, you leave
Wonderful
them. We can see them.
Norfolk.
Oh, yeah. I want to move on to another chapter. I'll go in order, but this was, well, no, I won't go in order. I want to talk a little bit about chapter 31. Another thing that stood out to me, the pastor has a daughter named Janet who gets used as a cover-up by some other teenagers at her school. And I thought, like, this really speaks to families. This is an inside look at what, how drugs and lies even touches people who would seem to be, outside of the grasp of that influence. Can you tell me a little bit about Janet? Do you really have a daughter? I don't even know what's real and what's only story, and how Janet gets kind of used by another girl at her school.
The book really centers around part of the issue of the drugs in the school, and the inciting incident, of course, in the book is Tony Lowe's murder. That's the thing that pushes the plot forward in the second chapter. Yeah, when I was in the hospital. So that's the kind of the cauldron that's going on at the high school. And in dealing with that, situation, my daughter at the time was younger than this, so I was looking into and reading from other kids that I knew in our youth group who were having trouble with drugs, covering for people, and how they could get away with that for a fairly long period of time. And that girl, I forget her name now, but Janet's friend, she was
Missy.
Missy was getting away with it for
Missy in the book.
Yeah, and her parents didn't know. And that confrontation with her parents that I had, like, I don't think they would have still been in denial I think if the pastor hadn't just pushed the issue when he figured out what was going on. So, that the drug culture and teenagers specifically, they will fake you out about that. And I think anybody that's had a family issue of drugs knows that to be true, or alcohol. They just hide it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what
Yeah.
Missy was using with Janet a little bit, using Janet as a cover for her drugs.
So
The
this kind
pastor
of goes beyond, this kind of goes beyond what you would think was a normal pastoral role. But what about, again, I don't know if everything in the story is just as it was in real life, but is that kind of how it shook down? You had to confront
oh,
some
number,
families and say, I'm
number five.
concerned.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
if you don't, you haven't done ministry. I mean,
Mm,
if you know that to be true and you know that she's in trouble, really
mhm,
in trouble, you, let me just say, with your best self, like the fella with the smoking problem, not
mhm,
my best self,
mm,
but probably with Missy's parents, my best self and my best pastoral self. And that type of confrontational level has to happen sometimes. And I think it's missing. Um, are you going to sacrifice missing on the altar of denial? Is that going to be our play here? Because that's what's
right.
going to happen if we don't do something. And her father was so much in denial because of we have these expectations of who our family is in society. And it's a small southern town. I was raised in Pensacola, and my mother was from Alabama. You have these expectations and who you're supposed to be, and you hide everything else. Well, anything in the dark gets rotten, and
Mhm,
as long as Missy was in the dark, and of course her situation with, her situation later where she gets, I don't want to give away the story, but she has this horrible situation because of the drugs and trying to get the drugs. It almost kills. So yeah, there are times that celebrate recovery when you're in a group setting or you have to go visit a household and you have to try to confront them with
mm,
what's going on in their lives.
yeah,
Oh yeah, it's hard, but it gets easier once you start doing it. It's not going to go well. It never really goes well.
right.
Three or four steps down the line, it might start repairing and redeeming, but usually the first confrontation was horrible. You walk away just sick.
Yeah. I love what you said though. If we haven't done hard stuff, if we haven't done sacrificial stuff, then we haven't done ministry.
No, you
It's just
it's
kind of
hard.
a facade.
Jesus' ministry was hard. He confronted people. His conversation with the Pharisees and his conversation with his own disciples. Get thee behind me, Satan.
Yeah, that does seem a little bit sandpaperish, doesn't
You
it?
whitewashed tombs, man. You're like stink like a cemetery, an open grave. Get away from me. Well, that's pretty confrontational, and
Yeah.
you have to you do it truth and love, doing the truth and love, truth and love.
Mm. I want to ask you a little bit about some small town living stuff too. I spent my high school years in a small town. I'm wondering how many people who are watching what small town they grew up in or live in. It was such a funny, it was a laugh out loud how close to reality this was. And I'm guessing that it's pretty much reality for you. I want to read a part about how this pastor decides, he's going to get to know the town. Um,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
this is
Is
upon
that the
moving,
store?
yes, to Mississippi in the summer of my 6th year on this planet. Okay, the pastor says, I am not a native. I'm still considered a newcomer. It takes at least one generation, maybe two, and then maybe, just maybe, you'll stop being a newcomer and start being trusted. I felt this. If you're at home and you felt this, give me a comment. But tell me about Barlow's store, okay? It says, I'll read this and I'll have you comment on it.
Okay.
For example, usually Monday, on my way to work, I stop off at Barlow's store to get gas, gum, or whatever. I don't have to stop, but it's important to stop. The town news is shared not in the paper, which sits unopened on the glass counter, but through the people that work there and the people that walk through there. Now, you go into this little sequence of events on how you endear yourself to the townspeople. Tell me about that and how real it was. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Dana. Welcome. Feel free to put your comments and questions in.
It is real to every pastor as they try to figure out the matrix of families and friends and relatives in a small town, how they try to figure that out. And you just want to be smart about it. And in that, I knew that there was just had happened, a ballet thing happened in town. So I was complimenting one woman's child because I knew she would compliment her friend. And her friend had just come to church with her husband and their two sons, Prince, and I think of the other child's name, but they played soccer and baseball. And so I knew that truthful complimenting would burrow its way down into that second family because they were attending my church. And then they would hear that I heard that they played, they'd done well at the ballet and the little girl, and then they would be back. And I said, I knew that if there were an emergency, they would call me. And that's what you want.
Yeah.
If they had an emergency in their family, they think of me as the pastor, which I was honored to think. This is 100 families. Every pastor said, this is 100 families they know that just came to church thinking we need a place for our children. And then when the troubles of life came, they called the pastor. And there's no greater feeling than walking into a room knowing you're carrying the word of God and the love of God, and everybody just gets quiet. You're able to bring a balm in that room that nobody else can. So, you want that experience as much as possible, and you can't get it unless you keep evangelizing. Unless you keep reaching people for Christ, even if they refuse, you still want for them to be a part of that trust matrix.
Right.
That you have with them, right? They're way out there. They're still like in Celebrate Recovery. They're still sexually involved, or they're still drinking, or they're still drugging. It doesn't matter.
No.
They're still having sexual problems. It doesn't matter. They're involved in the trust matrix with me, so that when the time comes, as God leads, I'm able to have a word. And over and over, they will start getting traction in this Christianity thing. And then they'll begin to, I said, people belong before they believe, and they believe before they behave. And that's usually the truth about evangelists. People belong before they believe. You've got to accept them before they will feel a sense of belonging. And if they feel a sense of belonging, they will let you get into their life.
You know what? You've just reminded me of the woman at the well and how
I'm teaching that on Sunday.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm not surprised. That's kind of how God works. But I mean, that's exactly what happened. She was looked at as a human being. Neither do I condemn you. And then go and sin no more. Then she was charged. So loved her first and lifted that condemnation that mankind was putting so heavy. So she belonged, she believed, and then she was empowered to behave. I love that. I'm going to remember those 3 B's.
So I've used that for 20 years, and it happened in Celebrate Recovery. When men would come to the large group, men and women, but men would come to my group, and they were involved in sexual addiction and alcohol, or horrible things, but they belonged to the group. They belonged. It was a place they belonged. It was in church. They wouldn't come on Sunday morning, but they belonged. And they started getting Christianity almost by osmosis.
Yeah.
The behavior started to change. They got to be better husbands and daddies.
That's awesome. I want to go, that was like a little lighter part of the book that really made me chuckle. And also I think it's kind of a great leadership technique, almost the politician side of pastoring, where one compliment straight to a person, that's very valuable. But what you learned and how you wiggled your way in there is complimenting through other people. It just kept gathering strength, like a compliment storm as it was spinning through your community.
Good idea. Yeah,
That's cool.
I've got a Barlow store within a mile of my house. It's
Oh yeah.
called it's called Ogden Store, and they're great people, and a lot of stuff happens in that store. I love to go up there and get a Diet Coke and just hang out.
Yeah. It's a cost of doing business, buying things that you don't need sometimes.
Yeah.
I want to go to one more story that was really poignant, and love to get your take on it. I'm going to go to chapter 6, where just a sad story about the loss of a little baby girl. And let's see if I can read this. Oh yeah, chapter 6. Okay.
It's the death of the little girl from the.
Yeah. So this is, I was kind of reading this around Mother's Day as well.
Was this my childhood? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
your childhood. There's a part where, Grandma and Grandpa called Nana and Papa here, right?
Yeah. Papa.
Papa are talking to a doctor about why this little baby that your mom is pregnant with has had is having challenges, is probably not going to make it. And the grandma says to the doctor, she's divorced, and that's why God is doing this. The doctor becomes very angry and says, this is not the way God works, Mrs. Farr. Now, tell me about the reality of the story and your, experience as a kid.
Yeah, my mother, when she married the second time, in the story there's a shooting in the story in the pool, which starts out the story, and that was a combination of a couple of events, but the shooting is true. And my mother remarried. Well, actually, in the book it's the first marriage, but it actually was the second marriage in real life. The second husband was very abusive. Not my genetic father wasn't, but the second stepfather, my first stepfather. And he, they had a baby. I had a sister named Skylar, and Skylar was born in Waterhead, hydrocephalic child, back in 1956, which there wasn't anything to do. They did the shunting and other things, but it didn't. But the story, it's a genetic. It seems to be a genetic part of our DNA that's happened before with previous generations. So in an earlier generation, the idea was there must be some sin for God to have punished you in this way. Well, I was, as an older adult reading into this child, that we know that that's not how God did. And although it was the way in my early years in church, at a particular church, kind of the way they figured out how sin worked. If you sin, God will punish you in such a way as to, as like this. And it was trying to teach the lesson, but that it's not that easy. You can't call it like that. It's more difficult, and that's not the way God works. We're not sure about Skylar's life. She lived a very short time, and she lived a very short time.
I want to read the funeral of this child, and it's just a couple paragraphs, and then get your comments on it. The baby in the book is called Starla. So it says, some days later we got dressed up, and it wasn't a Sunday. I sat on the front row beside Max and Nana and Papa. A small white box was on a metal stand next to the front wall of the room. The top was open, and Max said that Starla was in the box. The preacher from Joy Temple stood in front of the casket behind a small podium. For some reason, we didn't have the funeral service at Joy Temple. During the service, while the preacher talked about sin and hell and our need to get right with God, I got up, and Bear and I walked over to the casket, passing the talking preacher on the right. Standing on my tiptoes, looking in, I looked at my sister's face, which was tilted toward me. I raised Bear so he could kiss her on her left cheek. Then I kissed my hand and laid it on her forehead for a long time. The man stopped talking, turned, and looked over at me. On my way back to my chair, I passed him on the left. "Sit down," he hissed. I stopped and looked at him. "Shut up," I said. I finished the walk to my seat. I turned and said, "This is not the way God works, Nana." When we got home, Nana didn't give me a spanking. I love that. I love the warrior heart of this kid who just wants to love this baby girl.
Yeah.
Was any of that part of your experience?
Yes, yes. It was a lot of our experience. The scene where the preacher speaks to me and I think that's not. But I just wanted to emphatically say that if that's your theology, shut up. Shut up. You're not doing anybody any favors with that. It's bigger, greater, more complicated than that. Who knows the money? My mother, the flying back from California, all through my mother divorced and remarried again, and she got pregnant almost immediately. Of course, we were all scared to death about it. And then in 1961, my sister was born, beautiful Janet was born, and I have that scene where we walked, six dirty baseball playing boys in the middle of summer in Florida, sneak into the back. This happened. Sneaked into the back room, and in this white bassinet is this beautiful red-headed little doll, and we're all looking at her entranced by this amazing beauty of a baby, and we got sweat coming down, rivulets, sweat. We got two large baseball gloves hanging from skinny arms.
Yeah.
And it's just that, it's a picture. It's the other picture, we don't know why that happened, but this is such a blessing now.
Yeah.
So when the blessing comes, enjoy the blessing. Because God did something in our lives to redeem that which happened before. And heaven's coming. It's already there for Skylar. But heaven's coming. I'll see Skylar. And we'll certainly have a wonderful time. But I have a sister that was born when my mother remarried, and she's with us still, so she's been a blessing. But that should have been the exclamation mark on some of our lives about God's blessing, but it wasn't. The family still struggled with God and His blessing, and it was kind of sad. We didn't have the tools we have now.
Right.
That would have been helpful for my family. But I think my family in the 60s predicted a lot of what was going to happen in the 80s and 90s. And so a lot of my ministry was already born out of my own. I had a wonderful church that ministered to me when I was a child. When I was left at church, and when who was going to pick me up, nobody figured out who my last name because it kept changing.
Yeah.
But these people, accepted me. I belonged to something. And all in that midst of that difficult period, things got straightened out. It was the church. So wherever I pastored, we were going to have an incredible children's ministry. And we're not just reaching the children of the people who already belong. We're going after children who don't.
Yeah.
We'll do our best to make sure that they're loved and taken. Because out of those kids will be the missionaries and the pastors and the servants of God.
Yeah.
We can't be insulated from the world's problems. We try to do that, to choose the people for our churches because we want to be insulated. But we don't know those people are having problems too. They're faking it. They're faking it. They're fronting on Sunday morning. I would say stop fronting. You're fronting. You had a horrible morning. You yelled and screamed at your kids. You drank too much wine last night. You're fronting. I have some wonderful stories that will come in the next. I'm writing the next book now of wonderful people who quit fronting and got real with Christ, and children that were saved because their parents got saved, and the children were saved from disaster. The trajectory of their life changed because of the Christianity that happened to their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful stories.
In the few minutes that we have left, I want to ask you two more questions. The first being, what's the major takeaway, if you could pick one, that you want people to get from reading Buried in Baptism? What's the thing that you want them to get out of your book?
That there's always there's redemption, no matter what happened in your life. You can look at my life and see what's happened. God is orchestrating redemption, no matter how far you are. He's trying to orchestrate it, and you've got to, even when you're far away, the prodigal son. Somehow you've got to get and connect with that redemptive story that's not quite happened to you. It may be coming to yourself and taking the first step to home. Maybe stepping into a Celebrate Recovery plan. Maybe coming to my office for, because you're so, like you're so angry you're going to kill somebody because of something that happened in your past. Hurt people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, people are angry over nothing. So it's that your redemptive story is about to start if you can belong to God in some way, or the people of God. That's the story there. I think
Awesome.
for anybody, for me, I haven't told haven't told my full story, but oh my gosh, the redemptive story of God in my life is a miracle, and every way, every way.
I want to pause here and just read, well, I'll pop up Andrew's comment. Andrew Odom says, I was going to say redemption because it seemed to become more and more prevalent with each page, but I also thought the book really illustrated how we're all buried in junk. Thank you so much, Andrew, for participating. Appreciate it. Well, we're about at the end of our time together, but I know that people have connected with you. You had so many fun stories. If people want to hear more of your stories or be a part of your email list, or just get in contact with you, get more from you, how can they be in contact or get your ministry updates?
Well, it's the website's pastordavidclay.com, and my Gmail is pastordavidclay@gmail.com. You can find a book, of course, on Amazon with Buried in Baptism, and I think even on that page there are my Gmail is there, my website is there. I'm like everybody, if you hear from everybody, you put together an email list, and I'm trying to create a church without walls, a church where geography means nothing, of course, where you can minister with people like you're doing, where you can minister with people when you're hundreds of miles away. Because God doesn't time and space. Are you kidding me? With God,
Yeah, I'm so grateful.
We're not concerned with that.
It's so nice to be living in the times that we are, because we can't, God sets up each one of us, those of you who are watching and listening as well, you're included on this. We each have a personality. We each have, things that we love in our life that we're passionate about for a reason. And those things are definitely to be used for the kingdom, and definitely can be used for the kingdom. So keep being your weird and fun and unique self, because that's what we need. Wanda Taylor says, redemption and hope are what is so needed today. Well done, Pastor Clay. And then Susan Nation says, love you, brother-in-law. You're the real deal. And then, hey, Wanda, well, I'm appreciating hearing from them. It makes it more fun. I actually wanted to say Wanda had a great, I want to go out on this too, because I think this book would be so much fun for book clubs. I think this would be a blast for, if you wanted an alternative to your Sunday school or your Sabbath school, maybe a book that could reach people where a regular lesson study wouldn't quite be their thing yet. They're not ready to get deep into the word, but they want to ponder some of these things. How does God look at, drug use? How does God look at our small town mentalities? How do we treat each other, in times of duress? Like all of these things are regular, everyday kinds of questions. And I know you could make that, available to people. So anyway, thank you guys. I just want to say I appreciate you and your ministry. I'm so glad that God ran us together through Amazon marketing algorithm. And this man
We are
is,
friends because of an algorithm.
yeah,
Isn't that
but
great?
this man is a blessing and a gift. And if you have watched along today and enjoyed it, please share on your social media networks, because I would love more people to be able to read and benefit from this book and the wisdom behind it. So thank you, Pastor David, for joining me. I'll bid everybody goodbye after your final word.
Well, I want to thank you for having me on this show, of course. And there are so many stories out there. Everybody has a story. Sometimes it's not complete yet, meaning that the Lord is working in your life. You can tell your story. It's going to benefit somebody. And and I understand that, the 5 ways to salvation is great. We have the Sermon on the Mount and the story about anger, the anger and lust and all that. But it's story. And your story is a change story for somebody in your family or in your friends. Tell your story. Tell your story.
Amen. I want to answer Stacy really quick. She says she caught it too late for the whole interview. This interview will be available. She's watching from Facebook, but some of you are watching from YouTube. This will stay. This link will stay, the permanent link. There'll be a short processing period afterwards where you might not be able to see the whole thing. But yes, this link will be shareable within Facebook. It takes minutes. YouTube can take a couple hours. But please do watch the whole thing and leave your comments and questions too. So I'll pass on anything to Pastor David that comes in later. But again, thank you so much. I agree. Tell your story. And we will see you and all of those that you bring to the kingdom of heaven when that time approaches. Thank you guys so much. And thanks for joining Ask a Christian. I'm wishing you joy and peace for your journey, wherever it leads you. Bye for now.